Marcus Wellington had built an empire worth $12 billion, but he couldn't buy back his mother's smile. For 3 years, he watched the woman who raised him slip deeper into silence, her once bright eyes now vacant pools reflecting a world she no longer recognized. Alzheimer's had stolen her memories, her words, her joy. Every expensive treatment, every renowned specialist, every state-of-the-art facility had failed to bring back even a flicker of the vibrant woman she once was. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday that would change everything, Marcus discovered something that all his wealth couldn't purchase. Hidden in the corner of a small diner he'd never noticed before, he witnessed a miracle that would shatter his understanding of what truly matters in life. A young black waitress, earning minimum wage and supporting her own struggling family, was doing something that no amount of money had been able to accomplish. She was making his mother smile again. What Marcus saw that day would not only transform his relationship with his mother, but would challenge everything he believed about success, compassion, and the true measure of a person's worth. Sometimes the most profound gifts come from the most unexpected places, wrapped in the simplest acts of human kindness. Marcus Wellington stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 52nd floor, watching the city spread out beneath him like a chessboard of ambition and dreams. At 38, he had achieved everything society said would make him happy. His technology company employed over 15,000 people across 3 continents. His name appeared regularly on Forbes lists. Politicians sought his endorsement, celebrities wanted his friendship, and business schools taught case studies about his meteoric rise from a working-class neighborhood to the pinnacle of corporate America. Yet as he stared at his reflection in the glass, Marcus felt emptier than he had when he was 22 and struggling to pay rent on a studio apartment while building his first startup in his garage. Success, he had learned, was a peculiar prison. The higher you climbed, the thinner the air became, and the more isolated you felt from the world below. His assistant knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Wellington, your car is ready for the nursing facility visit." Marcus nodded without turning around. Every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 3 years, he made the same journey to Grandview Memory Care, one of the most expensive Alzheimer's facilities on the East Coast. The drive took 45 minutes through traffic, 45 minutes during which he would prepare himself for the heartbreak that awaited him. The facility itself was beautiful in that sterile, carefully designed way that wealthy people preferred their sadness to be packaged. Marble floors gleamed under soft lighting. Classical music played at just the right volume. The staff wore cheerful uniforms and spoke in professionally trained, gentle voices. Everything was perfect except for the one thing that mattered most. His mother wasn't getting better. Eleanor Wellington had been many things in her life. A nurse, a single mother who worked 2 jobs to put Marcus through college, a woman who laughed easily and loved fiercely. She had taught him to dream big and work harder. She had shown him that kindness was not weakness and that helping others was the highest form of success. She had been his compass, his conscience, and his greatest supporter. Now she sat in a wheelchair by the window of her pristine room, staring at nothing with eyes that no longer recognized her only son. "Hello, Mom," Marcus said softly as he entered her room. He had learned not to expect a response, but hope was a stubborn thing that refused to die completely. Eleanor didn't turn her head. Her fingers, once so skilled at threading IV needles and braiding his hair, now picked absently at the fabric of her lap blanket. The silence stretched between them like an ocean neither could cross. Marcus pulled up a chair and began his usual routine of one-sided conversation. He told her about his work, about a new charity he was funding for medical research, about the weather. He showed her pictures on his phone, knowing she wouldn't understand what she was seeing, but desperately hoping for some flicker of recognition. "Nothing, Doctor." Patterson, Eleanor's primary physician, found Marcus in the hallway after his visit. The doctor was kind but direct, a man who had delivered difficult news so many times that he had developed a gentle efficiency about it. "I wish I had better news, Marcus," Dr. Patterson said, his voice carrying the weight of professional sympathy. "Your mother's condition continues to deteriorate. The episodes of agitation are becoming more frequent, and she's eating less each day." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest. "What about the new treatments? The experimental programs? I've been reading about some promising research in Switzerland, and there's a clinic in Japan that's had some success with." Dr. Patterson held up a hand gently. "I understand your desire to explore every option. We've tried the best medications available. We've consulted with specialists from around the world. Sometimes, despite our best efforts and all the resources at our disposal, we have to accept that some battles can't be won with money or medicine." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had built his entire life on the belief that every problem had a solution if you were smart enough to find it and wealthy enough to implement it. The idea that his mother's condition was beyond his ability to fix challenged the very foundation of his identity. "There has to be something," Marcus insisted, his voice betraying a desperation he rarely allowed others to see. "I'll fund new research. I'll buy the entire facility if necessary. I'll hire every neurologist in the country." "Marcus," Dr. Patterson said gently, "sometimes the most loving thing we can do is simply be present. Your mother may not remember who you are, but on some level, she knows you're here. That matters more than you might think." But Marcus wasn't ready to accept that love might be more powerful than logic, that presence might matter more than presence. He left the facility that day with his jaw set in determination. If traditional medicine couldn't help his mother, he would find another way. He always did. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into research with the same intensity he had once applied to building his business empire. He hired a team of researchers to investigate every experimental treatment, every alternative therapy, every promising lead in Alzheimer's research. He flew to conferences in Europe, consulted with specialists in Asia, and funded 3 new research programs at major universities. His personal assistant, Sarah, watched with growing concern as Marcus became increasingly consumed by his quest to cure his mother. She had worked for him for 8 years and had never seen him so frantic, so desperate. He was skipping meals, sleeping only a few hours each night, and cancelling important business meetings to chase medical leads that often turned out to be dead ends. "Mr. Wellington," Sarah said one morning as she brought him his 4th cup of coffee before 9 a.m., "perhaps you should consider taking a step back. You're pushing yourself too hard." Marcus looked up from the stack of medical journals on his desk, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "I can't stop, Sarah. She's my mother. She gave up everything for me, and now when she needs me most, I'm failing her." "You're not failing her," Sarah said softly. "You visit her twice a week. You've made sure she has the best care money can buy. You've exhausted every medical option available. It's not enough," Marcus said flatly. "It will never be enough as long as she's sitting in that room, lost in her own mind, unable to remember that she was once a woman who changed the world just by being in it." The guilt was eating him alive. He remembered all the times he had been too busy to call her, too focused on closing deals to visit for her birthday, too important to attend a retirement party from the hospital where she had worked for 30 years. He had promised himself that he would make it up to her later, when he had more time, when his schedule was less demanding. Later had run out before he realized it was even approaching. His mother had been proud of his success, but she had also worried about the man he was becoming. "Money can't buy happiness, son," she had told him during their last meaningful conversation, before the disease began stealing her words. "And it can't buy love or friendship or peace of mind. Don't forget what really matters." He had nodded and agreed, but he hadn't really listened. He had been too busy planning his next acquisition, his next market expansion, his next conquest. Now, sitting in his opulent office surrounded by the trophies of his achievements, Marcus finally understood what she had been trying to tell him. The view from the top was spectacular, but it was also very, very lonely. His phone buzzed with a message from the nursing facility. His mother had refused to eat lunch again and had become agitated during her physical therapy session. The staff was concerned about her declining condition and wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss adjusting her care plan. Marcus closed his laptop and told Sarah to cancel his afternoon meetings. He needed to see his mother, even if she didn't need to see him. Even if she no longer remembered that he existed. As his driver navigated through the afternoon traffic toward Grandview Memory Care, Marcus stared out the window at the ordinary people living their ordinary lives. A father pushed his young daughter on a swing in a park. An elderly couple held hands as they walked slowly down the sidewalk. A group of teenagers laughed together outside a coffee shop. None of these people had his wealth or his power, but they seemed to possess something he had lost along the way to building his empire. They seemed connected to something larger than themselves, rooted in relationships that money couldn't buy or sell. Marcus had spent his entire adult life accumulating things, companies, properties, investments, awards. But he was beginning to realize that all of his accumulation had come at the cost of what might have mattered most, the simple, irreplaceable moments of human connection that formed the true wealth of a meaningful life. The nursing facility came into view, its perfectly manicured grounds and elegant architecture, a monument to expensive care. As Marcus stepped out of his luxury sedan, he wondered if his mother would have been happier in a smaller, less prestigious facility, where the staff might have had more time to simply sit with her and hold her hand. He signed in at the reception desk and made his way down the familiar hallway to his mother's room, preparing himself for another afternoon of sitting beside a woman who had once known him better than anyone in the world, but now looked at him as if he were a stranger who happened to share her space. What Marcus didn't know was that this ordinary Tuesday afternoon would become anything but ordinary, and that his definition of success was about to be challenged by someone who earned in a year what he spent on lunch. Marcus had been sitting with his mother for 2 hours when his phone rang with an urgent call from his office. A major investor was threatening to pull out of a multi-million-dollar deal, and his presence was required immediately for an emergency video conference with stakeholders in Tokyo. The timing couldn't have been worse, that the deal represented 18 months of negotiations and hundreds of jobs. "I have to go, Mom," Marcus said quietly, squeezing Eleanor's hand even though she didn't squeeze back. "But I'll be back Thursday, okay?" As always, she gave no indication that she had heard him. Marcus left the facility feeling the familiar weight of divided loyalties. His mother needed him, but so did his company, his employees, and his investors. The demands of success never paused for personal crises, and he had learned to compartmentalize his grief just as he compartmentalized everything else in his precisely organized life. His driver was waiting in the circular driveway, but as Marcus approached the car, he realized he couldn't face returning to his office immediately. The sterile atmosphere of the nursing facility and his mother's vacant stare had left him feeling hollowed out and desperate for something real, something that didn't smell like disinfectant and feel like expensive failure. "Take the afternoon off, James," Marcus told his driver. "I need some air. I'll catch a cab back to the office later." James looked surprised but nodded respectfully. In 8 years of driving for Marcus Wellington, he had never known his employer to dismiss him early or to want to be anywhere without a scheduled destination and purpose. Marcus began walking without any particular direction in mind. The neighborhood around Grandview Memory Care was an interesting mix of medical facilities, small businesses, and residential areas.
It was the kind of place where real people lived real lives, not the sanitized world of corporate towers and exclusive clubs that had become his natural habitat.
The afternoon sun felt warm on his face, and for the first time in months, Marcus wasn't thinking about market shares or profit margins. His mind was still heavy with thoughts of his mother, but the simple act of walking seemed to ease some of the tension that had been building in his shoulders for weeks. After about 20 minutes of aimless wandering, Marcus realized he was hungry. He hadn't eaten lunch, and his usual approach of having meals delivered to his office seemed less appealing than finding a real restaurant where he could sit among other human beings and remember what it felt like to be part of the normal world. The business district near the medical complex was filled with the kind of establishments that served the families and staff of nearby facilities. Chain restaurants and medical supply companies dominated the main strip, but as Marcus turned down a side street, he discovered a row of smaller, locally owned businesses that seemed to have more character. Sonny's Diner occupied the corner of a small strip mall, its cheerful yellow sign promising home-cooked meals and friendly service. The building itself was nothing special, just a converted storefront with large windows and a handful of parking spaces out front. It was exactly the kind of place Marcus would normally never notice, let alone consider entering. But today wasn't a normal day, and Marcus wasn't feeling like his normal self. The inside of Sonny's Diner was even more modest than its exterior. The floors were worn linoleum, the booths were upholstered in cracked vinyl, and the lighting came from simple fluorescent fixtures that had seen better decades. The walls were decorated with local sports team pennants and faded photographs of customers celebrating various milestones. It was the opposite of the high-end restaurants Marcus usually frequented, places where the waitstaff wore designer uniforms and the menus were printed on heavy paper with elaborate descriptions of locally sourced ingredients. But there was something about Sonny's that felt instantly welcoming. The air smelled like fresh coffee and home-cooked food. Conversations buzzed at comfortable volumes. An elderly man in the corner booth was reading a newspaper while his wife knitted. 2 nurses from a nearby clinic were sharing a late lunch and laughing about something that had happened during their shift. A young black woman approached Marcus with a warm smile and a well-worn menu. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with natural hair pulled back in a neat style and kind eyes that seemed genuinely pleased to see a new customer. "Good afternoon, I'm Keisha. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Marcus glanced at the simple menu, realizing he couldn't remember the last time he had ordered from anything that didn't require a sommelier's interpretation or come with a detailed explanation of the chef's philosophy. "Coffee would be great," he said. "And maybe you could recommend something?" "I'm not familiar with the menu." Keisha's smile brightened. "Well, you can't go wrong with our meatloaf special. It comes with mashed potatoes and green beans. And I have to say, our cook makes the best gravy in 3 counties. But if you're looking for something lighter, The chicken salad sandwich is really popular too. There was something refreshing about her straightforward enthusiasm. No elaborate descriptions of preparation methods or exotic ingredients, just honest food served with genuine warmth. The meatloaf sounds perfect, Marcus said, and he meant it. As Keisha went to place his order, Marcus looked around the diner with new appreciation. He had been so focused on climbing to the top of the economic ladder that he had forgotten what existed at every other rung. These were good, hard-working people living meaningful lives without the burden of extraordinary wealth or the isolation it brought. The coffee arrived quickly, hot and strong, and served in a simple white ceramic mug. Marcus couldn't remember coffee ever tasting better, perhaps because it came without the pressure of a business meeting or the weight of a decision that would affect thousands of jobs. He was halfway through his meal when he noticed them. An elderly woman in a wheelchair sat at a table near the window. She was clearly suffering from some form of dementia. Marcus recognized the signs immediately from his mother's condition. The woman's hands moved restlessly, and she made soft sounds that weren't quite words. Her grey hair was neatly arranged, and she wore a clean floral dress, suggesting that someone was taking good care of her. But it was the young man sitting beside her who caught Marcus's attention. He appeared to be in his 30s, with the weathered hands of someone who worked physically demanding jobs. His clothes were clean but worn, and his face showed the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from caring for someone with a degenerative disease while trying to maintain a normal life. "Come on, Grandma," the man was saying gently. "Just a few more bites. You love Keisha's soup." The elderly woman looked at him without recognition, then turned her attention back to the window. Her food forgotten, Marcus watched as Keisha approached their table with a fresh bowl of soup and a patience that spoke of experience with difficult situations. "How's Mrs. Dadbases? Patterson doing today, Tommy?" she asked softly. "Not her best day," Tommy replied, his voice heavy with familiar frustration. "She hasn't eaten much in 3 days, and I'm starting to worry she's going to end up back in the hospital." Keisha knelt beside the elderly woman's wheelchair, bringing herself to eye level. "Hello, beautiful," she said in a voice so gentle it made Marcus's chest tighten. "I brought you some fresh chicken soup. It's still warm." Mrs. Patterson looked at Keisha with the same blank expression she had given her grandson. But something was different. Her restless hands stilled slightly, and she seemed to be listening to the sound of Keisha's voice. "I know eating is hard sometimes," Keisha continued, taking the spoon from Tommy's exhausted hands, "that this soup is magic. It's going to help you feel better." What happened next would replay in Marcus's mind for weeks to come. Keisha began to sing softly as she offered small spoonfuls of soup to Mrs. Jang. Patterson. It wasn't a song Marcus recognized, perhaps a lullaby or an old hymn, but her voice was beautiful and soothing. More importantly, Mrs. Patterson began to respond. The elderly woman opened her mouth for the spoon, and when Keisha smiled at her, she smiled back. It was a small smile, confused and fleeting, but it was real. For those few moments, she seemed to emerge from the fog of her disease and connect with another human being. Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "She hasn't smiled in weeks," he whispered. Keisha continued to feed Mrs. O'Day. Patterson with the same patience and kindness, talking to her as if she were a dear friend rather than a stranger, lost in dementia. She told her about the weather, about the flowers blooming outside, about how pretty her dress looked. Most importantly, she treated Mrs. Patterson with dignity, as a whole person, rather than just a collection of symptoms. Marcus found himself riveted by the scene. Here was something he had been searching for desperately and spending millions trying to achieve. Someone connecting meaningfully with a person lost to Alzheimer's. And it was happening in a small diner by a young waitress who was probably earning minimum wage plus tips. Mrs. Patterson finished nearly half the bowl of soup, more than she had eaten in days, according to Tommy. When she was done, Keisha gently wiped her mouth and smoothed her hair. "There's my girl," Keisha said warmly. "You did so good." Mrs. Patterson's response was barely audible, but Marcus heard it clearly. "Thank you." 2 words that Marcus hadn't heard from his own mother in over a year. Tommy was openly crying now. "I don't know how you do it," he told Keisha. "The doctors, the nurses at the facility, they're all professionals, but they can't get her to eat like you can." Keisha squeezed Tommy's shoulder. "Sometimes it's not about being professional," she said. "Sometimes it's just about being human." As Marcus watched Keisha clean up the table and continue her other duties, he realized he had just witnessed something more valuable than any business deal he had ever closed. This young woman had accomplished in 20 minutes what the most expensive medical team in the country hadn't been able to do in 3 years, She had found a way to reach someone lost in the darkness of dementia, and she had done it not with advanced medical training or expensive equipment, but with simple human compassion and an intuitive understanding of what it meant to treat another person with dignity and love. Marcus finished his meal in a daze, his mind racing with possibilities. He paid his check and left a generous tip, but he couldn't bring himself to leave the diner immediately. Instead, he sat in his booth and watched Keisha work, studying her interactions with other customers and trying to understand what made her so special. She remembered everyone's name and their usual orders. She asked about their families and remembered details from previous conversations. She moved with efficiency, but never seemed rushed, always taking time to make genuine connections with the people she served. When a small child at another table dropped his crayon and started to cry, Keisha knelt down and helped him pick up the pieces, then found him a new set of crayons from somewhere behind the counter. When an elderly man struggled to read the menu without his glasses, she sat beside him and patiently read each item aloud, describing the dishes in detail and making recommendations based on his dietary restrictions. These weren't extraordinary acts of heroism. They were simple moments of human kindness, repeated throughout her shift with every customer who needed a little extra care and attention. But to Marcus, who had been surrounded by people who were paid to be nice to him, who lived in a world where every interaction was calculated for advantage, Keisha's authentic compassion was revolutionary. As he finally prepared to leave Sonny's diner, Marcus knew he would be back. Not just because the food was good or because the atmosphere was refreshing, but because he had found something here that he desperately needed in his own life. A reminder of what it looked like to treat other people as if they truly mattered. He also knew, with absolute certainty, that he had to find a way to introduce Keisha to his mother. The question was whether he could swallow his pride enough to ask a minimum wage waitress to help him with something that all his wealth and power had been unable to accomplish. Marcus returned to his office that afternoon, but couldn't concentrate on anything. The emergency video conference with the Tokyo investors felt surreal after what he had witnessed at Sonny's diner. As executives in expensive suits discussed market projections and profit margins, Marcus found himself thinking about Keisha's gentle voice and Mrs. Phillips' Patterson's fleeting smile. For the next 3 days, Marcus couldn't get the scene out of his mind. He replayed every detail, analyzing what Keisha had done differently from the highly trained professionals at his mother's facility. She hadn't used any special techniques or expensive equipment. She had simply treated Mrs. Patterson like a beloved family member rather than a patient to be managed. The more Marcus thought about it, the more convinced he became that Keisha might be able to help his mother in ways that traditional medical care couldn't. But asking for her help would require him to do something he hadn't done in years. Admit that his money and connections weren't sufficient to solve a problem. Thursday arrived, and Marcus made his regular visit to see his mother. Eleanor was having a particularly difficult day. She had refused breakfast and had become agitated during her morning medication routine. The nursing staff had given her a mild sedative to calm her down, but she sat slumped in her wheelchair, staring at the floor with glassy eyes. "Mum?" Marcus said softly, taking the chair beside her. "It's me, Marcus. Your son." Eleanor didn't respond. She didn't even acknowledge his presence. Marcus spent an hour trying to engage with her, showing pictures, talking about memories they had shared, playing her favorite music on his phone. Nothing worked. She remained locked in her own private world, unreachable despite being only inches away from him. Dr. Patterson found Marcus in the hallway after the visit, his expression grave. "I wanted to discuss some changes to your mother's care plan," the doctor said. "We're seeing increased signs of decline, and I think it's time to consider transitioning her to the advanced care unit." The advanced care unit was where patients went when they were approaching the final stages of the disease. It was beautifully appointed and staffed with compassionate professionals, but it was essentially a place to wait for the inevitable. "How long?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's difficult to say with certainty, but given her current trajectory, possibly weeks rather than months." Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him. He had known this day would come, but hearing it stated so matter-of-factly by a medical professional made it real in a way that all his research and denial had been trying to prevent. "I need more time," Marcus said desperately. "There has to be something else we can try." "What about that clinic in Germany I mentioned? Or the experimental treatment program in Boston?" Dr. Patterson placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Son, I understand your determination to fight this disease, but sometimes the most loving thing we can do is focus on comfort and quality of life rather than prolonging struggle." Marcus left the nursing facility in a state of barely controlled panic. The idea that his mother might die without ever recognizing him again, without ever smiling at him one more time, was unbearable. All his success, all his achievements, all his carefully constructed life meant nothing if he couldn't save the one person who had made it all possible. That evening, Marcus did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He went to church. Not the prestigious cathedral where he occasionally attended high-profile charity events, but the small community church in his old neighborhood, where his mother had taken him every Sunday throughout his childhood. Pastor Williams, now in his 70s but still leading the congregation Eleanor Wellington had been part of for decades, welcomed Marcus with surprise and genuine warmth. "Marcus Wellington," Pastor Williams said, embracing him. "Your mother talks about you every time I visit her at the facility. Even when she can't remember other things, she remembers being proud of you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "She recognizes you?" "Sometimes," Pastor Williams said gently. "Not always, but there are moments. She lights up when I mention your name, even when she can't quite place who you are." Marcus spent an hour with Pastor Williams, talking about his mother's condition and his own feelings of helplessness. The pastor listened without judgment and offered no easy answers, but his presence was comforting in a way that Marcus hadn't experienced in years. "You know," Pastor Williams said as their conversation was winding down, "your mother always said that the measure of a person wasn't in what they achieved for themselves, but in how they treated those who could do nothing for them in return." The words stayed with Marcus as he drove home to his empty penthouse apartment. He thought about Keisha, who had shown such kindness to a stranger's grandmother without expecting anything in return. He thought about his mother, who had dedicated her life to caring for others even when it meant sacrificing her own comfort and opportunities. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. Instead of going directly to his office, he drove to Sonny's diner. It was the breakfast rush, and Keisha was moving efficiently between tables, balancing multiple plates and maintaining cheerful conversations with regular customers who clearly adored her. Marcus waited patiently for a table, observing her interactions and building up the courage for what he needed to ask. When she finally approached his table with a coffee pot and a smile, Marcus felt suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't experienced since his first business pitch 20 years ago. "Good morning." "Back for more of that meatloaf?" Keisha asked warmly. "Actually, I was hoping I could talk with you," Marcus said. "When you have a moment, I mean. I don't want to interfere with your work." Something in his tone must have conveyed the seriousness of his request because Keisha's expression shifted to one of gentle concern. "Is everything okay? You seem a little stressed." "I'm fine," Marcus said quickly, then realized that wasn't true at all. "Actually, no, I'm not fine. I need help with something, and I think you might be the only person who can help me." Keisha glanced around the busy diner. "Let me check with my manager and see if I can take a quick break. Can you wait about 15 minutes? Marcus nodded gratefully and ordered breakfast, though he was too nervous to eat much. He had closed multi-million-dollar deals with less anxiety than he felt about asking a young waitress for a favor. When Keisha's manager agreed to cover her tables for a few minutes, she slid into the booth across from Marcus with 2 fresh cups of coffee.
"Okay, what's going on?"
she asked directly, but kindly. Marcus took a deep breath and began to tell her about his mother. He found himself sharing details he had never discussed with anyone. His guilt over being too busy to spend time with her before her diagnosis, his frustration with his inability to help her despite having unlimited resources, his fear that she would die without knowing how much he loved her. Keisha listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly compassionate as Marcus's story unfolded. "The other day, I saw what you did with Mrs. Patterson," Marcus continued. "You got her to eat, you made her smile, you treated her like a person instead of a disease. I've hired the best doctors in the world, and none of them have been able to do what you did in 20 minutes. Mrs. Patterson is special to me," Keisha said softly. "Her grandson Tommy and I went to high school together. I've known her since I was 16. She used to make the best peach cobbler you ever tasted." "That's exactly what I mean," Marcus said urgently. "You see her as a whole person, not just her illness. The staff at my mother's facility is professional and kind, but they treat her like a patient. You treated Mrs. Patterson like family." Keisha was quiet for a moment, seeming to understand where the conversation was heading. "What are you asking me to do?" she said gently. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I'm asking if you would consider visiting my mother. Just once maybe, to see if you could connect with her the way you connected with Mrs. Patterson. I know it's a lot to ask, and I know you don't know me or her, but I'm running out of options and time." The request hung between them like a bridge neither was sure how to cross. Marcus had never felt so vulnerable or desperate. Here he was, a man who commanded respect in boardrooms around the world, begging a young waitress to help him reach his dying mother. "I don't know anything about Alzheimer's care," Keisha said slowly. "I'm not a nurse or a doctor or a therapist. I'm just someone who tries to be kind to people." "Maybe that's exactly what she needs," Marcus replied. "Maybe kindness is more powerful than medical training." Keisha studied his face for a long moment. Marcus could see her weighing the request, considering the implications of getting involved in a stranger's family crisis. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Anything." "Why me?" "I mean, I'm sure you know lots of people. Why are you asking someone you just met?" Marcus had been dreading this question because it forced him to confront some uncomfortable truths about his life and relationships. "Because in the past 3 years, you're the only person I've seen who was able to truly connect with someone who has this disease," he said honestly. "But also because you're the only person I've met in a long time who seems to care about people without expecting anything in return." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been surrounded by people who are paid to be nice to me, people who want something from me, people who see me as a means to an end. You don't know who I am or what I do for a living, and you still showed more genuine compassion to a stranger in 20 minutes than most people show in a lifetime."
Keisha absorbed this information thoughtfully.
"What do you do for a living?" Marcus hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I own a technology company. I'm financially comfortable." Keisha smiled slightly at his understatement. "Financially comfortable people don't usually eat at Sonny's Diner unless they're lost." "I was lost," Marcus admitted. "In more ways than one." The admission seemed to decide something for Keisha. She reached across the table and gently touched his hand. "What's your mother's name?" she asked. "Eleanor. Eleanor Wellington." "Tell me about her. Not about her disease, but about who she was before. What did she love? What made her laugh? What was she passionate about?" For the next 30 minutes, Marcus found himself sharing memories of his mother that he hadn't thought about in years. He told Keisha about Eleanor's garden, her terrible singing voice that she used anyway, her habit of feeding stray cats, her belief that every person deserved dignity and respect regardless of their circumstances. As he talked, Marcus realized that somewhere in his desperate search for medical solutions, he had forgotten to remember his mother as a person rather than a patient. Keisha's questions helped him reconnect with who Eleanor Wellington had been before Alzheimer's began stealing her identity piece by piece. "She sounds wonderful," Keisha said when Marcus finished. "I'd be honored to meet her." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. "Really? You'll come?" "I'll come," Keisha confirmed. "But I can't promise anything will happen. Sometimes people with dementia respond well to new faces, and sometimes they don't. I don't want you to get your hopes up too high. Just having you try means more than you know," Marcus said. They arranged to meet at Grandview Memory Care the following Tuesday. As Marcus prepared to leave, he realized he should offer to pay Keisha for her time, but something stopped him. She had agreed to help not because of what she might gain, but because she understood what it meant to love someone who was slipping away. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Not the desperate, demanding hope that money could fix anything, but the quiet, patient hope that sometimes human connection could accomplish what medical intervention could not. As he walked back to his car, Marcus reflected on how much his perspective had changed in just a few days. A week ago, he had measured success in terms of stock prices and market share. Now he was learning to measure it in terms of moments of genuine human connection. Brief smiles from people lost in illness, and the courage to ask for help from someone who had every reason to say no. The most successful deal of his career might not involve any money at all. The weeks that followed Eleanor's miraculous afternoon with Keisha were both the most hopeful and most heartbreaking of Marcus's life. True to her word, Keisha visited Eleanor twice a week, always managing to connect with her in ways that amazed the medical staff and brought moments of clarity and joy that had seemed impossible just a month earlier. Some visits were more successful than others. There were days when Eleanor remained locked in confusion, unable to recognize either Marcus or Keisha, responding to their presence with agitation or complete withdrawal. But there were also days when she emerged from the fog of her disease like a swimmer surfacing for air, engaging in conversations that revealed the vibrant, intelligent woman she had always been. Marcus began timing his visits to coincide with Keisha's, treasuring these moments when he could interact with his mother as she truly was, rather than as the disease had made her. During these visits, he learned more about Eleanor's life and thoughts than he had in years of regular but superficial conversations before her diagnosis. He discovered that his mother had kept a journal throughout her nursing career, documenting not just medical cases but also personal reflections on the meaning of healing and the dignity of every human life. She had volunteered at a homeless shelter for 15 years, something she had never mentioned to Marcus. She had written letters of recommendation for dozens of young nurses, helping them advance their careers and find their calling in medicine. "I never knew she did all that," Marcus confided to Keisha, after one particularly revealing visit. "I was so focused on my own life and career that I never really asked about hers." "It's never too late to learn about the people we love," Keisha replied gently. "Your mother is still teaching you even now." The comment prompted Marcus to begin asking different questions during his visits. Instead of focusing on whether Eleanor remembered recent events or recognized faces, he began asking about her experiences as a nurse, her philosophy of caring for others, and her hopes for the future when she had been raising him as a single mother. These conversations, facilitated by Keisha's natural ability to create safe spaces for difficult topics, revealed depths of his mother's character that Marcus had never fully appreciated. Eleanor had sacrificed career advancement opportunities to be available for his school events. She had worked extra shifts to pay for his college textbooks, while telling him the money came from savings. She had turned down marriage proposals from good men because she worried about how it might affect Marcus's adjustment to having a stepfather. "You were always my priority," Eleanor told him during one of her clearer moments. "I wanted you to have every opportunity I never had, but I also wanted you to remember where you came from and why it matters to help other people." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that he was finally learning these lessons about compassion and priorities from his mother, just as she was losing the ability to consistently access her own memories. As Eleanor's good days became less frequent, Marcus found himself spending more time at Sonny's diner, drawn not just by the hope of convincing Keisha to visit his mother more often, but by the atmosphere of authentic human connection that seemed to permeate the modest restaurant. He began to recognize the regular customers and learn their stories. There was Frank, a retired mechanic who came in every morning for coffee and conversation after his wife died, finding in the busy diner an antidote to the loneliness of his empty house. There was Maria, a single mother who brought her young daughter for breakfast before school, saving money by sharing a plate but never letting her child know they were struggling financially. There was Tom, an unemployed construction worker who nursed a single cup of coffee for hours while using the diner's Wi-Fi to search for job opportunities. Too proud to accept charity, but grateful for Keisha's kindness in never rushing him to leave. Marcus realized that Sonny's Diner served as more than just a restaurant. It was a community center, a support network, and a place where people could find dignity and connection regardless of their economic circumstances. Keisha was at the heart of this community, remembering everyone's stories, celebrating their successes, and offering comfort during their struggles. "Have you ever thought about going to nursing school?" Marcus asked Keisha one afternoon as she took a break between shifts. "You have such a natural gift for connecting with people who are struggling." Keisha laughed, but not unkindly. "Nursing school costs money I don't have, and I can't afford to stop working while I study. Besides, I like helping people right here. This diner serves a different kind of healing than what happens in hospitals." Her response made Marcus think about the barriers that prevented talented, caring people like Keisha from pursuing careers where their gifts could have even greater impact. He began to research nursing school costs, scholarship programs, and part-time study options, not because Keisha had asked for his help, but because he was beginning to understand that true success might mean using his resources to expand opportunities for others rather than just accumulating more wealth for himself. The conversation also made him reconsider his own business practices. His company employed thousands of people, but Marcus realized he knew very little about their individual circumstances, their struggles, or their dreams. He began instituting changes in his management approach, requiring regular meetings between executives and frontline employees, implementing programs to help workers pursue continuing education, and creating pathways for advancement based on merit and potential rather than just credentials and connections. These changes weren't popular with all of his board members and investors, who questioned why he was wasting resources on employee development programs that didn't have immediate profit implications. But Marcus found himself increasingly confident in his new priorities, even when they challenged conventional business wisdom. "Success isn't just about maximizing shareholder value," he told a room full of skeptical executives during a quarterly meeting. "It's about creating an environment where every person in our organization can reach their full potential and contribute meaningfully to something larger than themselves." The philosophy was inspired directly by watching Keisha transform the atmosphere of a modest diner through her commitment to treating every person with dignity and respect. As autumn arrived, Eleanor's condition continued to decline despite the momentary improvements during Keisha's visits. The periods of clarity became shorter and less frequent, and she began experiencing the physical symptoms that marked the disease's progression into its final stages. Dr. Patterson called Marcus to discuss transitioning Eleanor to hospice care, a conversation that Marcus had been dreading but could no longer avoid. "We've done everything medical science can offer," Dr. Patterson said gently. "Now it's time to focus on keeping her comfortable and ensuring she's surrounded by love." Marcus signed the papers with hands that shook despite his efforts to remain composed. He had always believed that every problem had a solution if you were smart enough and determined enough to find it. Accepting that his mother's disease was beyond his power to fix required letting go of beliefs that had defined his entire approach to life. That evening, he went to Sonny's diner and found Keisha finishing her closing duties. She looked up as he entered, immediately reading the expression on his face. "How is she?" Keisha asked softly. "The doctors think it's time for hospice care," Marcus said, his voice breaking on the words. "She's dying, and there's nothing else they can do." Keisha set down her cleaning cloth and came around the counter to embrace Marcus, offering the kind of comfort that couldn't be purchased or scheduled or managed by professional staff. "I'm so sorry," she said, and her genuine grief for a woman she had known for only a few months reminded Marcus of how rare it was to find people who could form authentic emotional connections so quickly and completely. "I don't know how to do this," Marcus admitted. "I've never felt so helpless in my life."
You don't have to do it alone, Keisha assured him.
"And you're not helpless. You can make sure she knows she's loved. You can make sure she's comfortable. You can be present with her in whatever time you have left." Over the following weeks, Marcus rearranged his entire life around being with his mother. He moved temporarily into a hotel near the nursing facility, delegating most of his business responsibilities to his executive team and attending only the most critical meetings via video conference from Eleanor's room. Keisha visited daily now, often bringing small gifts, flowers from her own garden, photographs of beautiful places she had visited, books of poetry to read aloud. She would sit with Eleanor even when the older woman was sleeping or unresponsive, simply being present in the way that had become her signature form of caring. During one of Eleanor's last coherent moments, she took Marcus's hand and spoke with the clarity and purpose that had defined her approach to life. "I'm proud of the man you've become," she said, her voice weak but determined. "Not because of your business success, but because you've learned what really matters. You've learned to see people the way Keisha sees people, as valuable just because they exist."
She turned to Keisha, who was sitting quietly in the corner of the room.
"Thank you for teaching him that lesson. It's the most important thing he could ever learn." Eleanor Wellington died peacefully on a Thursday morning in November, with Marcus holding one hand and Keisha holding the other. Her final words were, "Thank you," spoken so softly that Marcus wasn't sure if she was addressing them or expressing gratitude for a life well lived. The funeral was held at Pastor William's church, and Marcus was amazed by the number of people who came to honor his mother's memory. Former patients, colleagues from the hospital, volunteers from the homeless shelter, neighbors she had helped through difficult times. The church was filled with people whose lives had been touched by Eleanor Wellington's quiet kindness. Keisha spoke during the service, sharing stories about Eleanor's wisdom and compassion that brought laughter and tears in equal measure. She talked about how Eleanor had taught her that true healing happened not just through medical intervention, but through human connection and the recognition of every person's inherent dignity. After the service, as people shared their memories of Eleanor, Marcus realized that his mother had been far more successful than he had ever understood. She hadn't accumulated wealth or achieved fame, but she had created a legacy of kindness that had rippled through countless lives over decades of service. Standing in the church fellowship hall, surrounded by people who had been transformed by his mother's care, Marcus finally understood what she had been trying to teach him about the true measure of success. 6 months later, Marcus established the Eleanor Wellington Foundation, dedicated to providing scholarships for nursing students from low-income families and supporting community-based care programs for seniors with dementia. Keisha was the foundation's first scholarship recipient, and she eventually became its program director, overseeing initiatives that brought the kind of compassionate, dignity-focused care she had provided to Eleanor into facilities across the country. Marcus continued to run his technology company, but with a fundamentally different philosophy. He implemented profit-sharing programs for all employees, created on-site childcare and elder care support, and required that a percentage of company profits be donated to local community organizations. The company's stock price initially fluctuated as investors adjusted to the new approach, but long-term performance improved as employee satisfaction and retention reached industry-leading levels. On the first anniversary of his mother's death, Marcus visited Eleanor's grave and found Keisha there, placing fresh flowers on the headstone. "I come here sometimes when I need to remember what's important," Keisha explained. "Your mother had such a clear sense of purpose. She knew that taking care of people wasn't just a job, it was a calling." "She would be so proud of what you're doing with the foundation," Marcus said. You're helping so many people pursue their own calling to care for others.
We're helping them, Keisha corrected gently.
This foundation exists because you learn to use your resources in service of something larger than yourself. That's exactly what your mother hoped you would do. As they stood together in the quiet cemetery, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that day when he first wandered into Sonny's diner. He had set out to find a way to make his mother smile again, and in the process he had discovered what it truly meant to be successful. Real wealth, he had learned, wasn't measured in dollars or market share or personal achievements. It was measured in the connections you made, the people you helped, and the legacy of kindness you left behind. His mother had been the richest person he had ever known, not because of what she owned, but because of what she gave away freely every day of her life. And now, thanks to a young waitress who had shown him the power of simple human compassion, Marcus was finally learning to be rich in the ways that actually mattered.